Once upon a time, in a remote corner of the savannah, there was a village called Kimbunda. The village was peaceful, surrounded by mountains and lush forests, where the song of birds accompanied every sunrise. The inhabitants of Kimbunda lived in harmony with nature, respecting the sacred laws passed down from generation to generation. Among these laws, one rule held a special place in the hearts of the villagers, that of the purity of young girls. All were to remain virgins until their marriage, an honor passed down from their mothers and grandmothers, supposed to guarantee the blessing of the ancestors on the community. In this village, the purity of girls was not only a choice, it was a promise to the protective spirits, a deeply rooted tradition that symbolized the continuity and balance of Kimbunda. The elders, guardians of these traditions, jealously ensured that this rule was respected. Among them was Kwame, the wisest of the village, whose white beard and piercing gaze gave him an aura of respect. Kwame often told the younger ones stories of the ancestors, reminding them of the importance of preserving the village values to avoid the wrath of the spirits. Adoma, the chief's daughter, embodied these values perfectly. Beautiful, graceful, and respected, she was the epitome of purity and obedience. The other young girls saw her as a role model, while their mothers praised her behavior as an example of what it meant to be a true daughter of Kimbunda. The men of the village, however, admired her from afar, impressed by her beauty and elegance, but knowing that her destiny was already set. However, one day, an unexpected event came to disturb the tranquility of the village. A young woman, who had come from the city, arrived to visit her aunt. Her name was Aisala, and as soon as she arrived, everyone noticed her. She was not like the other girls of Kimbunda. She wore colorful, figure-hugging clothes, revealing her arms and legs in ways the village women could not imagine. Her hair, styled in an elaborate way, shone in the sun, and her bold smile attracted attention. The young men, captivated, followed her with their eyes as she walked through the village, and even the older ones had never seen such confidence in a woman. The mothers, worried, whispered among themselves. "Who is she to behave like this?" murmured one. "She is beautiful, but her looks, she will confuse our daughters," replied another. But the young girls, for their part, looked at Aisala with admiration. She embodied a form of freedom, a new and exciting world of which they knew nothing. Her walk, her confidence, and her shimmering clothes broke the codes and aroused secret dreams in their hearts. Adoma watched Aisala from afar, perplexed. She had never met a woman like her, and although she was reserved by nature, something about Aisala intrigued her. She wondered what it was like to walk with such confidence, without fear of the judgment of others. But true to the values of her village, she did not dare to approach her. She was content to observe her discreetly, like all the other girls in Kimbunda. Aisala, for her part, seemed perfectly aware of the effect she had on the villagers. She smiled wryly as she felt the admiring and curious glances on her. She walked with a light step, as if she were floating, savoring each moment. She had never known a life of restrictions and strict rules like those of Kimbunda, and it fascinated her to see how much the villagers seemed subject to their traditions. She decided to take advantage of her state to shake up, a little, this apparent calm. One evening, while she was walking near the market, Aisala noticed a group of young girls following her shyly, perhaps hoping to exchange a few words with her. She stopped and invited them to come closer with a warm smile. The girls, surprised and intimidated, hesitated for a moment, then approached, driven by their curiosity. It was the perfect opportunity for them to learn more about this mysterious stranger who seemed to come from a completely different world. Aisala began the conversation in a jovial tone, telling stories of the city, describing the large houses, the crowded markets and the parties where music resounded until late at night. She spoke of the freedom she found there, of the fact that women could choose their lives, decide their future, without being constrained by rules of purity or virginity. The young girls, captivated, listened with fascination. They looked at each other, imagining this world of freedom where they could live by their own rules. Among them, a young girl named Kesai, known for her rebellious spirit, dared to ask the question that was burning on everyone's lips. Aisala, are the girls in the city forced to remain virgins until marriage? She asked, blushing slightly. Aisala burst out laughing. Of course not, my dear. The women of the city are free to make their own choices. It's their life, and they are the only ones in charge of it. She looked at them, smiling encouragingly. Why do you want to lock yourselves into rules that don't bring you anything? You deserve to live, to discover the world, without fear of judgment. These words resonated in the hearts of the young girls like a forbidden but captivating melody. They knew that their mothers and the elders would disapprove of such ideas, but for the first time, they were beginning to ask themselves questions. What if Aisala was right? What if they could, too, live according to their own choices, without the restrictions imposed by their traditions? Day by day, Aisala's influence grew among the young girls of Kambunda. They looked to her as a role model, a free and independent woman, something they had never imagined they could become. Adoma herself, although torn between her duties and this new fascination, could not help but feel this desire for freedom bubbling within her. Aisala, a good observer, quickly noticed that her speech was sowing seeds of independence and doubt in the minds of the young girls of Kambunda. She sometimes invited them to discreet discussions, away from the eyes of elders and parents. During these secret meetings, she spoke of distant cities, of women who walked, who earned their own money, who lived alone and made their own decisions without depending on anyone. She described to them a world where women were respected for their strength, their intelligence, and not only for their purity. Adoma, though reluctant at first, could not help but give in to the temptation to join these secret gatherings. She told herself that as the chief's daughter, she should know what was being said and done in secret. However, the more she listened to Aisala's stories, the more she felt torn between the traditions that had robbed her childhood and the promises of freedom and choice that Aisala offered her. One evening, when the young girls had gathered around the fire to listen to Aisala, she told them a story that had a profound effect on Adoma and his companions. She told them about a woman named Sono, who had grown up in a small village similar to Kambunda, but who had dared to live a life elsewhere. Sono, according to Aisala, had defied the prohibitions of her community to choose a destiny that was her own. She had opened a shop in a big city and now lived in a house she had bought herself. She didn't let tradition decide her future, Aisala concluded with a smile. She is free and happy. These words awakened in Adoma a sense of injustice she had never felt before. She wondered why she and the other girls of Kambunda had to worry so much about preserving a tradition that suddenly seemed heavy and oppressive. Why did their entire lives have to be defined by this purity? Why had the ancestors imposed such restrictions? Days passed, and the change in the girls of Kambunda became visible to even the most discerning eyes in the village. Mothers began to notice that their daughters were spending more time doing their hair, making themselves beautiful, and wearing slightly more colorful clothes, influenced by Aisala's boldness. Some young men in the village also noticed these changes and did not hide their interest in this new look of femininity. Bakery, the traveling merchant, took the opportunity to court some young girls by offering them small modern gifts from the city. Soon, a rumor began to circulate in the village. Fueled by whispers and furtive glances, the girls of Kambunda were no longer as pure as they claimed. The parents, at first angry, thought that this was just gossip, a simple test of adolescence. However, the elders of the village, worried, decided to organize a meeting to discuss the behavior of the young girls and the observed changes. Kwame, the village elder, spoke first. There are things we cannot ignore. The traditions of our ancestors are not things that we can choose to abandon at will. They were established to protect the harmony of Kambunda and ensure our prosperity. Other elders nodded in agreement with Kwami's words, while anxious parents listened attentively, worried for their daughters. The village chief, Adoma's father, also expressed concern. "I have heard that this foreigner, Isola, is having an unhealthy influence on our daughters. She is showing them a way of life that is not ours, and they seem fascinated by her stories. Perhaps we should ask her to leave for the sake of our peace." But Kwami raised his hand to appease the gathering. "Before we make such a decision, let us call upon the ancestors for guidance. Perhaps there is a test that we must overcome. If our daughters have gone astray, we must show them the way." So a grand ceremony was held to invoke the protective spirits of Kimbunda. Around the sacred fire, the elders, dressed in finery symbolizing their ties to the ancestors, chanted songs to ask for their guidance and wisdom. The night was dark, the silence heavy, as if nature itself were holding its breath. The elders closed their eyes, concentrating to receive the spirit's words. After a long moment of silence, Kwami opened his eyes and announced in a solemn voice, "The ancestors ask us for a sacrifice. They want a virgin to restore Kimbunda's blessing. If one is not found, the wrath of the spirits will descend upon our village, and we will experience a period of suffering and desolation." The villagers were stunned. A shiver of fear ran through the assembly. The idea that there might no longer be a virgin in the village seemed unthinkable, and yet the recent changes in the behavior of the young girls had sown doubt in their hearts. The next morning, all the parents brought their daughters before the elders for the purity test. The girls, nervous and frightened, stood in a line, looking at their parents with apprehension. A sacred chalice was placed before them, containing a blessed stone that only a true virgin could lift. Kwami announced in a deep voice, "Whoever can lift this stone will show the ancestors that purity still exists in Kimbunda. Let the first one come forward." The first girl stepped forward, took a deep breath, and dipped her hand into the chalice. She tried to lift the stone, but despite her best efforts, she only managed to graze it. She stepped back, her face red with shame, to the murmurs of the crowd. One by one, the girls stepped forward, and each attempt ended in failure. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, filled with worry and despair. Not a single one had succeeded in lifting the blessed stone. Even the chief's daughters, including Adoma, failed to lift the sacred stone. The assembly was in shock. The question that everyone was afraid to ask was now formulated in whispers: "Is there no longer a virgin in the entire village?" The faces of the elders closed. The chief, stunned, lowered his head, unable to look the villagers in the eye. Shame and anger mingled in the hearts of each parent. They had believed in the purity of their daughters, in the solidity of their traditions. But this ordeal seemed to say otherwise. The girls, feeling the accusing looks of their parents and elders, burst into tears. Some cried, "It's not our fault. We were influenced." Others murmured incomprehensible words. The names of Bekori and Isola were pronounced with contempt and anger, as if they were the cause of the moral downfall of the village. The days following the ceremony were marked by a heavy silence in the village of Kimbunda. The news of the failed purity test spread like wildfire. Everyone, from the youngest to the oldest, spoke of it with shock and indignation. Purity, that sacred value that symbolized the honor and pride of Kimbunda, had been sullied. The elders, once so confident in the morality of the village, felt as if the world as they knew it was crumbling beneath their feet. Parents, disoriented, began to view their own daughters with suspicion. They asked themselves questions that would have been unimaginable in the past. How could they have betrayed the values passed down from generation to generation? Who had perverted them to the point of denying the very essence of their culture? They did not understand what could have transformed respectful young girls into unruly souls. Some parents decided to forbid their daughters from leaving the house, hoping to restore some semblance of discipline. Others, furious, questioned their children day and night, seeking answers to this moral decline. Families were divided. Fathers accused mothers of failing to look after their girls, while mothers responded by blaming outside influences and especially the presence of Isela. The idea that a foreigner could have wreaked such havoc in their village reinforced the feeling of betrayal. Tensions were further heightened when rumors of secret relationships began to circulate. It was whispered that some of the girls had been seen with young merchants from other villages. The names of Bekori and other passing men kept coming up in conversations, fueling the rage of the fathers and the shame of the mothers. The girls of Kimbunda, once proud of their innocence and respect for tradition, were now seen as frivolous and dishonorable. The kind looks had turned into accusatory ones, and each of them felt isolated, abandoned by her own family. The moral decline of the village was not limited to the young girls alone. The distrust and shame that permeated Kimbunda created a heavy and suffocating atmosphere. The men began to suspect their own wives, fearing that they had been influenced by this wave of disobedience. Some even went so far as to forbid their wives from going to the market without their permission. They saw in every gesture or look of their relatives a possible sign of rebellion, fueling tensions within their homes. The gatherings at the market, once places of joyful exchanges and laughter, became veritable public tribunals. The mothers gathered in small circles, muttering acerbic words and pointing fingers at those they suspected of having participated in the debauchery. The girls' names were spoken of with contempt, and some went so far as to rename them using derogatory terms. "This generation is lost," was whispered in every corner of the village. They have forgotten who they are and where they came from. The weight of shame weighed heavily on the girls. They felt betrayed, misunderstood, and abandoned by those they loved. They had not considered that their simple desire for freedom could cause such devastation. Those who had attended the rallies with Isala were the most affected. They remembered the stories of the town, the promises of independence and choice. That world of freedom now seemed distant and inaccessible. Now they were prisoners of a society that would never forgive them for this betrayal. Isala, for her part, continued to attract suspicion. The villagers treated her with hostility, some even ignored her completely or gave her looks filled with contempt. Although she had come as a guest, she soon found herself isolated. The doors that had once opened for her were closing one by one. Even her aunt, fearing for her own reputation, asked her to leave. "I'm sorry, Isala, but your presence here only makes things worse. The villagers blame you for everything that happens. It's time for you to go back to where you came from." Isala, hurt and distraught, eventually left Kimbunda, but not without leaving behind a bitter taste of disillusionment. She had hoped to bring a breath of modernity and emancipation, but she had only succeeded in sowing disorder and discord. The young girls, for their part, found themselves faced with their choices, with no one to guide them. They felt trapped between their desire for freedom and the weight of their community's expectations. But this was only the beginning of Kimbunda's moral downfall. For the elders, seeing the bonds unravel and purity disappear, decided to tighten the rules. They imposed new restrictions, forbidding young girls to leave the village without the supervision of a parent. Mixed gatherings were banned, and even festive ceremonies were reduced to avoid any overflow. Purification rituals became frequent, with prayers addressed to the ancestors in an attempt to restore the lost blessing. Despite all these efforts, the spirits did not seem appeased. The crops continued to wither, the rivers around the village dried up, and the animals fell ill. The elders saw this as a sign that the anger of the ancestors had not yet been appeased. The villagers began to fear an eternal curse. Some even spoke of leaving Kimbunda, believing that the village was definitively cursed. Despair gradually took hold of each household. Silence settled in the houses, punctuated by whispers and prayers. Families that had once been united were crumbling under the weight of suspicion and shame. Young girls, once proud of their belonging to Kimbunda, no longer recognized themselves in the values imposed by their community. They saw themselves as strangers in their own village, deprived of their innocence, their freedom, and now even their dignity. Kimbunda, once a symbol of purity and harmony, had become a place of division and fear. The elders' gazes were dark, full of regret and reproach. The villagers realized, a little too late, that the rigidity of their traditions had contributed to alienating their own children. As the days passed, the situation in Kimbunda only worsened. The drought continued to rage, the rivers dried up, and the earth cracked under the intensity of the sun. The crops that once fed the village in abundance were now only a memory. The villagers, distraught, sought answers, explanations, a solution to appease the anger of the ancestors. Tensions were at their peak when, on a moonless night, Kwame called an emergency meeting with the elders and parents of the village. Under the great sacred baobab tree, faces were serious, gazes hard. Kwame spoke, his voice echoing in the silence of the night. "My brothers, my sisters, we have failed to protect our values. The anger of the ancestors is palpable, and the entire village is suffering the consequences. We have lost our bearings, and our youth is now corrupted by influences that were foreign to us. We must take decisive measures to restore the honor of Kimbunda and regain the blessing of the spirits." The other elders nodded, although some had sadness in their eyes. Kwame proposed the final sacrifice. One of the girls, one of those who had betrayed purity, should offer herself voluntarily to the ancestors to atone for the collective sin of the village. This sacrifice, he thought, might perhaps appease the curse and save Kimbunda. Kwame's proposal provoked murmurs of fear and indignation. The parents, horrified, refused to accept that one of their daughters be sacrificed. But Kwame insisted. "This is our only chance. The ancestors demand a sign of our repentance. If we do not act, Kimbunda is doomed to die." The council ended on a somber note. The parents returned home, their hearts filled with indescribable fear. They knew that this proposal marked a point of no return. The next day, as rumors of the sacrifice spread, the girls were overcome with anxiety and grief. They felt trapped by a society that judged and punished them for desires they had not chosen to feel. Adoma, the chief's daughter, felt a deep sense of responsibility toward her community. She understood that the ancestors' anger was the result not only of the girls' actions, but also of the elders' intransigence and the village's inability to evolve. She decided to act to save Kimbunda, but in her own way. When night fell, Adoma secretly went to the sacred baobab tree, accompanied by the girls her age. They held hands, forming a circle, united in an act of courage. Adoma, in a strong and determined voice, addressed the ancestors. "We recognize our mistakes, but this village must change. The anger that strikes us is the result of the rigidity of our customs. We want to regain our place in Kimbunda, but we cannot give up our aspirations. We ask you to forgive, and we promise to protect the values of this village, while adapting them to our hearts." The girls, each in turn, spoke to express their repentance and their desire to be accepted as they were. They spoke of their love for their community, their desire to contribute to its prosperity, but also of their need to have a voice, to be able to make choices without fear of judgment. It was a moment of sincerity, of purity found in vulnerability. Suddenly, a gentle breeze rose, like a whisper of response coming from the depths of the earth. The leaves of the baobab began to quiver, and a feeling of peace enveloped the circle of girls. Adoma felt a benevolent presence, a sign that the ancestors had heard them. The next morning, rain began to fall on Kimbunda. It was a gentle, purifying rain, which seemed to wash away all the accumulated resentment and shame from the village. The villagers, amazed, came out of their houses to welcome this blessing. The elders, who had been watching from their homes, understood that the ancestors' forgiveness had been granted. In the days that followed, Kimbunda began a profound transformation. The elders, influenced by the courageous actions of Adoma and the girls, decided to adapt certain customs. The girls were no longer forced to remain locked up until marriage. They could participate in village activities, choose their own paths, while respecting the fundamental values of their community. Kwame, the village elder, spoke at a large assembly to announce these changes. Our traditions are our strength, but they must not be our chains. The ancestors have shown us that we must know how to evolve in order to preserve our unity. We will keep our values, but we will learn to listen to each other's aspirations. The girls, once oppressed by the weight of imposed purity, finally felt free to be themselves, while remaining attached to their culture. Adoma was honored for her courage and leadership. She was appointed youth counselor, tasked with helping the new generation navigate tradition and modernity. The girls followed her example, and Kembunda found peace, enriched with new perspectives and the wisdom she had gained through her ordeal. Kembunda's story of moral downfall and rebirth became a legend passed down through the generations.